Hey everyone, Dalen with another random making encounter. This is going to be a blazing fast 20 minutes. We got a lot to cover. This is an epic build with lots of stuff. The inspiration here, or the motivation here, was to create a more permanent solution to the Pepper's Ghost illusion that I did for my Haunted Mansion Nook. I'll post a link to that video at the end of this one. The problem with that one was it required a rechargeable little mini MP4 player, which at the end of the day was easy to kind of incorporate into the Nook, but it was kludgy. You had to recharge it. It had to be slid in and out. It created all sorts of interesting problems. And so it wasn't something that could be left on all of the time. This was intended, or is intended, to be something that will permanently run forever and ever until the screens and LEDs burn out. With a Pepper's Ghost illusion, the challenge is to hide everything. Hide the screen, hide the reflective panel that is being projected onto. And so we're controlling eye line. And so this first little wall here is a lath and plaster wall that is the front of the Nook that will help control and constrain what can be seen through the Nook into the back walls. And so that is really its purpose. And the idea here was to imply that we're behind a wall, and more on why we're behind a wall in a minute as we talk about the inspiration for the Nook. Lath and plaster is a traditional technique where thin strips of kind of raw wood are attached to the framing, and then a thick layer of plaster is kind of squished and forced through the gaps in the lath, which helps the first layer of plaster adhere. So we're going to use some modeling paste for our squishing. The amount of squish will be determined by the thickness of the modeling paste and the pressure applied. It's about 1/16 of an inch, maybe a little heavier in certain areas where we wanted a little bit more to come through the lathing. Now, one thing, you don't want it to be too even, because again, this first layer of plaster is usually a pretty crude base coat that really provides adhesion to the wall. And so having some variety and variation in the amount that has kind of been forced through is nice. And I'm being actually a little intentional in how much pressure I'm using to force certain areas through more and leave some a little bit lighter. This is a very traditional way that I build Nook walls. If you have watched any of my videos, this should seem very familiar to you. I have a series of building a book Nook together on my channel. Go check those out if you want a little bit more detail and a deeper dive into building walls this way. Tagboard and this 1/4-inch balsa or basswood strip is really easy to work with. It's pretty affordable. It's just rigid enough. It's easy to cut with a miter box and a utility knife. Now we have a body to hide because, as the title suggests, we are creating a Nook based on, or paying homage to, the book series by Jonathan Stroud, Lockwood Co, which is also sadly a short-lived Netflix series. So it's an introduction into the world and sort of the introductory story that we are presented with. And the idea here is that, without too many spoilers, one of the first things we're introduced to in Lockwood Co is Lockwood and Lucy are investigating a haunting. We'll talk a little bit about the story here in a minute, but they're investigating a haunting and they ultimately discover a hidden body. So the lath and plaster front wall is the idea that we are kind of looking into the scene from behind the wall. We're behind the wall, and then there's also a body hidden behind the wall, which it's a little disturbing. In this future, now these book series, this is not a paid endorsement. No one's telling me that I need to go and promote. Audible hasn't reached out to me and said, hey, go sell books. The books and the audiobooks are outstanding. The series I thought was really, really good. It was a great adaptation. I thought the acting was outstanding. I thought that the writing was great. The look, the feel, the vibe was really, really compelling. And it got canceled. But the books are there, and the books are better. There are, I think, 5 books. I could be wrong, 4 or 5. They end very satisfactorily. The character development is great. I would say they're kind of tween books, but I'm kind of an old guy and enjoyed listening to them as I was working on projects. And I think that they're really, really quite good. And they take place in a world that is a bit hard to put your finger on. It's not quite the past. It's not quite the future. It's kind of now, but not really. And it's a world where ghosts, for whatever reason, have come back to haunt the living. They're rising from the grave. And if you are touched by a ghost, you get ghost touched and you swell up and you die a horrible death, and it's not great. And the problem is that only young people can see ghosts. So people up until maybe their late teens and early 20s can actually see ghosts. Adults can't. And when the ghosts come out at night, the world becomes a very, very scary and dangerous place. So to combat this, agencies are created of young children who go out and use a variety of techniques to fight the ghosts. Ghosts in this world are tied to physical objects that hold them to this kind of mortal plane. And so these agencies, which Lockwood Co is one of them, a small one, they research the hauntings, they research the ghosts, and then they try to find the objects that are holding them to this mortal existence and bringing them back, and then they destroy them and end the haunting. So that's kind of the setup for the stories. And one of the things that I really love about the series and the books is that it has a great sense of nostalgia. It has a great feeling of traditional kind of, it's set in primarily London. So you have this mix of modern, but also this mix of very traditional architecture. And then it's kind of, there's also this middle ground of sort of not old and ancient, but old enough, like 70s and 80s. There's sort of this interesting nostalgia and nostalgia quality that comes to it that I was trying really hard to capture in this Nook. And I think that that's one of the things that makes it feel really, it has a great mood to it, because each of the ghosts has a story, and part of it is researching and understanding why this particular ghost might, or ghosts plural, might be haunting a particular location. And so then the agencies have to go and find the thing. And in this particular instance, in this particular haunting, it's tied to a murder and a tragedy and a body hidden in the wall. So as I was building this Nook, I wanted that blend of traditional, sort of this traditional front room with more traditional wallpaper and furniture and traditional paintings. And then in the story, the back room, the room that the body is found in, was a converted home office. So it's cluttered and it's kind of more modern or more contemporary, and has sort of a sense of being used as more like an office space, a utilitarian space. So for example, in the front room, I'm using this traditional tin or plaster ceiling for the ceiling. You really don't spend a lot of time looking at the ceiling, but that idea of it being very traditional in the front room, and the lighting fixtures are very traditional, whereas some of the lamps are maybe more or less traditional. Now, quick little side note on all of these family photos and paintings, these are all AI generated. I used Midjourney to create these so that I didn't have to go and like scrape things off of the web. And I could create family photos and kind of pick and choose and tailor them to be kind of the era or the look or what people were wearing to really fit the vibe. And then using some 3D printed and painted frames to create these little, like this little hunt scene is completely AI made up. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to sell the mood. Now, I had a hard time figuring out how to do some soft goods. And so this is some adhesive athletic tape that you would use to wrap your ankle. It's really fun to work with. It worked out really well. I was actually pretty chuffed to see how these things turned out. Now, the texture is a little coarse. In the future, if I were to do something like this again at this scale, I would probably look for something that's a little bit finer, but that adhesive was just tacky enough to wrap these things and really easily create things like seams and little side pouches. I created some salt boxes because salt's what you use to fight ghosts. And I was looking for things that were more traditional or older designs to contrast with kind of sterile and modern and kind of ugly banker's boxes. So it's that idea of that contrast between older and traditional or antique and modern and cold and kind of uninteresting in a lot of ways. This wallpaper in the back room is an example of that as well. This is kind of right in that line between it's not really modern, and so it's kind of a modern pattern, but it's got a bit of a burnt orange / green 70s vibe to it. And so and it's kind of ugly in some ways, and so it's that idea of beautiful, like traditional ornate wallpaper in the front. Kind of at some point, this was maybe fashionable and stylish, but now we look at it and are like, I don't really know how I feel about that wallpaper. I'd probably peel it off. So that's kind of what I was hoping would kind of come across. As you're building stuff like this, you really do want to kind of immerse yourself into the reasons, the rhyme, the why. Now, this black paint here is really just applied to avoid any stray reflections that might hit the reflective panel that the ghost will be projected on. Speaking of ugly, this is kind of an idea of like a steel desk with a wooden top, very utilitarian, very unpleasant. Probably don't necessarily want this in your house. Be great for an office, but it's that back room repurposed into an office kind of feeling. You can see on the top of the table, there's some little stains, some little rings. Here's where it starts to get fun. We're again talking about storytelling. These are the family. This is the old family home, the trip to the seaside resort. We all went to the beach for the summer vacation and really using those little elements to tell stories. And then again, like here's our final finished poor murder victim that was hidden away for years and years in the wall. And it is a little, as you kind of put yourself in this, you really are in that mindset of, well, gosh, if I had to hide a body in a wall, what would I do? Which again, is probably not the best thing to say on a YouTube video, but I try to like really think through and immerse myself in that storytelling. And when it comes to something like a story like this, it's a little sad and upsetting. But I think it leads to a better outcome. If you think about, if I had to like take down a picture because I needed to knock a hole in the wall because I think something's hidden behind the wall, like how do I push things out of the way? Where would I take that big little Hamlet poster, which is a little homage or a little nod to the story? Where would I put that? How would the boxes get kind of pushed aside? And how would I go about kind of doing the things that I needed to do to tell that story, get into that scene? Here are pretty much the finished rooms. There's a rapier that goes across the kind of the doorway, which hides the base of the reflective panel, which is about a 45-degree angle between the viewer and the back wall. But here are all of those elements, some additional salt boxes, all the family. This is sort of that traditional front room. And then the more cluttered utilitarian back room with all of the storage boxes. The wall, the pictures are a little askew because, Lockwood's bashing through the wall. It's a ring of salt to try and trap that spirit in its location. I did add some papers to the top of that desktop. Now, at some point, you do need to wrap up and close things up. This is where it starts to get stressful because you're kind of committing to closing everything up. Here is the screen. One thing on these screens, you want the thinnest possible plastic you can find. And then I've got little strips of wood as stiffeners, but the thicker the plastic, the more there is a risk of a double reflection. For the electrical, I have a video on this as well. I'll put a link at the end of this video to that, using copper tape to wire things up. I really love this method. It's a great way to do complex wiring, yet keep it very compact and clean. While we do a bit of soldering, a big shout out to my patrons, Don, Walker, Jesse, Mary, Tina, Janet, Max, Francois, C. Thank you so much for your continued support. If you'd like to support the channel, be sure to check out my Patreon page where I post all of the goodies, lots of files that I use in my projects. For my free subscribers, it's always good having you as part of the Creative Cabal. Be sure to check out my Instagram page. Be sure to like this video, comment, and subscribe. All of that great stuff to feed the algorithm. The exterior box is 3mm MDF laser cut, and then it's covered with some self-adhesive mahogany veneer. The mahogany veneer is very affordable as veneers go, and the grain is really, really gorgeous, really stunning. And I'm using an aniline alcohol-based stain for it, and I'm doing a little bit of a laser engraving of a Lockwood Co logo that I created. Here is the outside of the inside. I printed a little bit of a transparency with some branches on it and put that in the window just in case you were really scrutinizing it. Probably not super necessary. And then on the back side, the box on the bottom right is the looping video player, and then there's an Arduino that controls the RGB lighting and the regular lighting. The exterior has a few coats of satin varnish, just a spray varnish, and then some crackle varnish on the front, some skulls to make it spooky. Who doesn't love a good crackle varnish? Put a little glazing in, slide everything together, and the project will be done. Let's take a look at the inside final results.